Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Well, I mean, how else do you start a show than by this?
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. But the real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man. And it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution.
Yeah.
Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win. Because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble, but this was a rigged decision right from day one with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
That is Donald Trump, fresh from the courtroom after hearing from a jury of 12 of his peers. Not elected officials, not appointed by elected officials, judges, 12 peers who spent, 9 hours over the course of 2 days to deliberate, revisit evidence and testimony, and conclude that Donald John Trump was guilty on all 34 charges brought before him. Plenty to get into on this story, including reaction. Here's how I watched. I watched how the verdicts were brought in, and I don't know, I guess I foolishly, naively thought there were going to be cameras in the courtroom. There weren't. So we just got to watch the cable TV channels giving us almost like a scorecard. It's like watching a sporting event as the number kept changing. So I watched that happen on CNN as the verdicts were being read. They were being read to them in an earpiece, and so I got to watch that. I watched that on CNN, and then immediately, once they were all in, I said, I got to go watch Fox News. And I did. And Jeanine Pirro and the Five and they did not disappoint. Sean Hannity, did not disappoint. I have some audio from that. And of course, right-wing acolytes were dispatched. Ben Coates, Tim Scott dispatched to cable TV. Tim Scott on CNN was something else. And while I could focus on the sadness that is Tim Scott as a U.S. Senator representing the state of South Carolina that I lived in for 11 years and still have many friends in, let me go to a North Carolinian, another Carolinian, friend of mine actually, a wise black man by the name of Isaac Bailey who wrote for the Charlotte Observer overnight. For the first time in his life, Donald Trump has been held accountable. Predictably, after he was found guilty on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records to cover up a sex scandal to undermine an election. That's a mouthful, right? The former president spouted the same tired talking points. He claimed the case was rigged, a word he uses every time he loses, like in 2020 and since. He claimed the country was being overrun by undocumented immigrants being let out of prisons. He said the case should have not been tried in Manhattan. He said the judge was, quote, conflicted and should not have been allowed to try the case, though he was very low energy as he spoke outside of the Manhattan courthouse. In short, he sounded and looked like a loser again. He set a couple of presidential records that won't ever be broken. He's the first president to be impeached twice and the first former president found guilty of felonies in a criminal court. Let that just wash over you, folks. Those are fitting honors for a man as corrupt as Trump, Isaac Bailey writes. He may have tens of millions of followers who will stick with him no matter what. He won't be able to erase those stains from his legacy. There is nothing his followers can do about that. I don't know what's going to happen in November or in the other more serious criminal cases that likely won't play out before the election. Isaac Bailey writes, I don't even know what sentence the judge will hand down. A scheduling hearing is scheduled for July 11th, only days before the presumptive Republican presidential nominee is expected to become the GOP's official nominee. Isaac Bailey continues, but I know Trump has finally been held to account for something. He spent a life doing illegal and immoral things and running businesses into the ground while maintaining wealth and power, if only the illusion. And yes, let's hang on to that. That illusion was forever punctured at about 5 p.m. Eastern Time on May 30th, 2024, at the hands of 12 men and women in downtown New York, where Trump made his name, no less, who seemed to have little trouble finding him guilty. They deliberated for maybe a dozen hours, which feels like lightning speed given how complex legal analysts kept telling us such a case was. It meant that the jury decided not to fall for the subterfuge from Trump and its lawyers. No one really believed Trump didn't have an illicit affair with a porn actress, or that his top attorney, Michael Cohen, committed crimes related to the case all on his own without the awareness or direction of the boss. The jury decided to say that the emperor didn't have the new clothes, but was just a naked man trying to get away with obvious crimes he had long been able to commit with little or no recourse. You know, let me stop for a second. That's a point that I think doesn't get made enough. One of the reasons why this case being tried in Manhattan was important is because financial crimes happen all the time, but in the financial capital of the world, they're adjudicated on all the time. That's their forte. It's New York City, it's Manhattan, it's Wall Street. That is their forte. Also, no jurisdiction knows Donald Trump better than New York City. We can sit here and talk about how, the impact he's made on their skyline. It's not that big of an impact. But we can also talk about the impact he's made on lives in and around metropolitan New York. He has stiffed contractors of payment for decades and been made famous for it. That impact has ripple effects. When you don't pay a business for work that you contracted them to do, they can't pay their employees. They can't pay the folks that they get their supplies from. It has a ripple effect on other businesses. People hear about that stuff. So any notion that Donald Trump couldn't get a fair trial in the place that he believes he had such a lasting impact on and was so successful in, well, if you can't get a fair trial in such a place, it makes you wonder, or it makes me wonder, well, if you were so successful there, how many people did you stomp on in that district to get to where you are? Okay, back to Isaac Bailey's column here. It's a good day for the country. If nothing else, it shows no man is above the law. That it's not just an empty slogan. He then puts in parentheses, well, there is the behavior of a certain Supreme Court justice we need to grapple with. Or his wife. Maybe Trump will avoid prison time. Maybe he will only receive probation. The judge has more than a month to consider the appropriate punishment. And can I just tell you, a month of waiting for that? Well, Donald Trump, is he going to parse his words? Because he came out right out of the gates, out of the courtroom, and started slamming the judge. The judge who is going to sentence you, Donald, maybe lighten up, maybe let up. He can't do it, not for a month. Oh my God, please. The good news is the case is over, so there's no gag order. Have at it, Donald. Okay, back to Isaac Bailey. For the record, I'm not a big fan of long, hard sentences for anyone who don't commit ugly, violent acts. I maintain that stance even for Trump. And we should be careful with how we talk about convicted felons. to not inadvertently dehumanize millions of Americans because of glee about Trump's convictions. That's something that we on the left should take into account. I don't believe he should be president, Isaac Bailey writes. Though I believe that long before this verdict, I believe all Americans should now consider what it would mean to make a man convicted of crimes like these president. We would be more of a laughingstock around the world than we've already become. Trump doesn't have to go to prison to be fully punished, but we should not punish ourselves by sending him back to the White House. I just keep wondering when the GOP gets its act together. When do they realize the long losing streak that they and their presumptive nominee are on? I mean, just him in the courtroom. Obviously, 34 counts yesterday handed over, guilty. The fraud trial, civil fraud trial, last winter, guilty. The Jeanine Pirro case, guilty. Trump Foundation fraud, guilty. Trump University, guilty. And then there's the electoral losses. 2022 midterms, that stunted red wave. The 2020 election cycle, his loss, the loss of his party, down ballot. 2018 midterms, the blue wave. I mean, I guess in some respects he can at least be happy that he won yesterday's popular vote, right? Because he never did in 2020 or 2016. What does it take for him and the GOP to realize it's not us, it's you? And what does it say about us as a country that we allowed this facade, this ruse, this mirage of success to ascend to the highest office in the land, essentially because he was a reality TV show character? I mean, we could sit here and talk about the disinformation or how easily entertained the American public is, but this also falls on our media landscape too. Our journalism has been poisoned. We got lots to go into about that too, and the misinformation part. An interesting story that just came out regarding that. So strap in, kids. Got lots to cover today on The Ron Show, on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast. So, just so you're aware, when I went to college, I thought I was going to be a journalist. By the way, thank you for listening to The Ron Show. At Ron Show ATL on the X platform, Facebook, Instagram. I did actually have finally something to post on Instagram. The memes have been beautiful. At Threads as well. So when I went to UGA, I was going to be a journalism major. As a kid growing up, I wrote for 2 daily newspapers, one in Augusta, the other in Athens. I wrote for a weekly newspaper. In like news and sports, I was editor of my high school paper for 2 years. I was going to be a journalist. I have to admit, and I'm not a journalist, obviously, because I'm like a 31st year sophomore at Georgia. Anyway, I have to admit, I did pick up a few of the ethical tools along the way. People slam American journalism for not covering Trump correctly. And to be honest with you, how do you cover Trump correctly? It's difficult to tell the folks that you are writing for or broadcasting for, you've been duped. The man is a facade. He's a ruse. He is not successful. You watched him on a TV show and you liked the idea. You thought that, wow, the way he commands the room, which by the way was never his boardroom. That was not his boardroom. It was a set. There's a whole story about how, like, when you actually went into Trump's actual offices, chipped furniture and rings where there were glasses that had condensation. Just again, we were all taken for a con by a TV facade. And by the way, they went to him because of his pop culture appeal for that show, not because of his success. We'd seen him on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous in the 80s and the 90s in his gilded penthouses. We thought it was lavish. We thought it was nuts. But man, how successful he was, flying around Manhattan in those private helicopters to get to and fro on his private phone, which, by the way, used to be the size of bread loaves. It was all a facade, and we got taken in for it. Where did we start to take him seriously, though? I mean, I think the American public obviously bought into the whole like Celebrity Apprentice facade, paying no attention to the fact that he had bankrupted 4 businesses, a grand total of 6 times, and was having to lay off thousands of workers and impoverishing people who worked beneath him while he managed to avoid it on borrowed money. Lots of questions about where some of that money came from. Who was buying his real estate from foreign countries for well above value? You know, all these lies, all these facades, all these ruses. But he questioned Obama's birth certificate, and all of a sudden there were enough people who were like, hey, what's this guy got to say? I mean, to me, he's no different than, and listen to this list, Scott Baio or Roseanne Barr. They're not bright people. They just say things that the crazy drunk uncle that everyone eye rolls about at Thanksgiving and other holiday gatherings spouts because he watched Fox News. For decades, he watched Fox News. Fox News, by the way, also burned by their affectation with Donald Trump. Hundreds of millions of dollars, the sum was. And yet, I had to go watch. After the verdicts were brought in, Jesse Waters believes that the Trump story is that of a Greek tragedy.
This man's life is a Greek tragedy. From billionaire, bankruptcy, TV star, Hollywood Walk of Fame, divorces, marriages, children. And that was even before he enters politics. And then you have investigations and hoaxes and a pandemic. And now they're trying to incarcerate this person.
It's everyone else's fault. It's not Donald's. Oh yeah, and then he spoke again about his imprint on New York City too.
It's hard to imagine how the president feels right now as someone who was born in New York City, who then came back and had a big part in creating the New York City skyline. Not many people have such a powerful imprint on the city as Donald Trump.
Stepping in dog walking into your house leaves an imprint too, Jesse. Again, he's all bought in on the Trump success mirage.
And then Page 6, fixture, big part of the 80s and 90s social scene here that defined New York City culture.
The culture where a married man was out having affairs or grabbing women because they let them.
And then grows that brand into a reality TV star with The Apprentice at the time of reality TV's zenith.
But he leaves out the part where Trump was actually broke when NBC and Mark Burnett came to him to play a role in a scripted reality TV show.
And then takes it even higher to the White House and keeps New York City safe, keeps New York City wealthy. And then you get a once-in-a-100-year pandemic, and the man is on the phone with Cuomo sending ships, sending ventilators, doing everything he possibly can to help this city.
Actually, Donald Trump was so focused on an Asian travel ban that he didn't enact the travel ban from Europe that largely fed into New York City and had a lot to do with New York's initial COVID outbreak. And then, of course, he and Cuomo feuded throughout most of 2020 through the election cycle, even arguing about the effectivity, is that a word, of the first wave of COVID vaccines because the two distrusted each other so much. Again, a New Yorker that Donald Trump can't get along with, and he's from New York. Who knows him better than New Yorkers? And where were the jurors from again?
And what does he get in return? He gets a sick DA with a
crooked judge,
and a ridiculous Biden Justice Department official who conspire to destroy him because he was successful. It's a shame. It's a damn shame.
That on the network that usually garners the most ratings, the most eyeballs in America. And it speaks to the state of journalism in this country and how easily duped enough of our population is by these bootlicking acolytes, many of whom I believe are smarter than they let on when in front of the camera. And again, if it's about ratings and it's about money from advertisers, that's a problem with journalism too. Anyway, we've got lots more to cover. Got a hard break. Back in just a few minutes here. The Ron Show on the America One Radio app, at AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast.
Call or text The Ron Show anytime at 404-919-2725. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
Donald Trump's defense attorney, Todd Blanche, went on Jesse Waters because that's where you got it. It's what, Newsmax wasn't close enough? Todd Blanche went on Jesse Waters yesterday on Fox News, and they had a little Q&A. And I think if you want to vote for Donald Trump and you think he's an effective leader, I want you to listen to this conversation, because if the man can't choose the right defense attorney or defense attorneys and can't participate as much as his attorney says he does in this case and find success, why do you think he's going to be a successful president? And by the way, never mind the first 4 years that we already have with him in office, where we have the memories and the record and the data and plenty of video and clips and tweets. My God, the tweets. Anyway, here's Todd Blanche on Jesse Waters.
Did your client get a fair trial?
I mean, no, I don't think so. I mean, we've been saying for over a year that we couldn't get a fair trial in Manhattan. We couldn't get a fair trial with the judge, and it played out in lots of ways exactly as we expected. So
their decision was to roll over and play dead, apparently, because they called two witnesses when they had the chance to put up a formidable defense if there were to be one. In other words, they just surrendered. Facing long odds, they believed, they surrendered. American voter, that's what you want in a president? Someone who just acquiesces easily? Like, I don't know, in the face of Vladimir Putin, maybe? He kept complaining, though.
Just the whole way this case was charged. The district attorney says that this type of case is a bread and butter, that they do these cases all the time. That is not true.
Oh, but they do.
It's just not true. This is a case
Financial
that,
district.
The records of President Trump's personal records, his personal checkbook from 2017,
where he wrote
is what he was on trial for.
Michael Cohen checks.
That does not happen all the time. It doesn't happen all the time in Manhattan.
No.
And it doesn't have to happen all the time in any jurisdiction in this country. And that's fine. That's fine if you want to indict somebody and go after somebody for conduct that happened in 2017. But I think where it becomes problematic for me as a lawyer is, don't look me in the eye and says, this is bread and butter. We do this all the time. That we're treating President Trump like we treat anybody else. That's not true.
No, actually, he got away with a lot more than anybody else, because anybody else would have been thrown in jail for the number of times he had been contemptuous while this trial was going on. All right, now this speaks to Donald Trump as a leader. Again, you have to consider who's going to be running the country in November, Donald being one of the options. We already have a 4-year record of him doing so, and wasn't so glowing. So how does he handle participation in a court case where his life, his freedom is on the line?
How involved was Donald Trump in his own defense?
I mean, what do you think? I mean, very involved. He's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. He jokingly said to us a lot, sometimes he wanted to be the litigator. You know, he wanted to be the one that was actually arguing, because he's a smart guy and he knows what he's doing. We made every decision together. We did. And there were things that he was frustrated with. You know, the judge several months ago, there was we wanted to be able to argue reliance of counsel, that to some extent President Trump was relying on his lawyer, and the judge didn't allow us to do that, and things like that, where he would really push us and say, well, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? It was an honor for me to spend the last 6 weeks with him, defending him.
So Todd Blanche then goes on and sort of praises the jury, the actual jury that weighed in and gave the 34 guilty charges, but also kind of surmises, what are you going to do? It's New York City and Donald Trump's not popular here.
Look, was I satisfied? We put a motion in because we said we could not get a fair jury in Manhattan. And that's I'm not being disparaging to the jurors, man. They were great. They showed up on time every day. They were committed. They paid attention. But we're in a situation where we had a very limited number of people we could strike. And most of the folks, overwhelming number of folks, had a very strong opinion of President Trump. And it wasn't positive. And so imagine you, Jesse, going to trial facing 34 felony counts, and 100 people walk in the room, and the judge says, if you have a strong view of Jesse Waters, you can go ahead and leave. Half the room leaves. Half the room just walks out. Okay, so that's what we were dealing with. And look, that's not a reflection of the jury pool. That's not even a reflection of the judge. That's just the reality of New York City.
Again, Donald Trump wants to be president of the United States, and this is the attorney he chose.
Would you have done anything differently? Is there a witness you said, oh, maybe I should have called that witness? Maybe I should have done this?
Yeah, I don't know. I got to think about that, man. We had a team. My team is amazing. The folks that work with us they're brilliant, and the president has a team, and they're brilliant, and we all did the best that we could, and I wouldn't change anything that we did. Of course, I'm sure there's going to be folks that are on your show that take a different view, and maybe I will too at some point, but no, we did the best we could.
And they lost on all 34 counts. The man who wants to be, again, president of the United States, who wants to sit across from tables with world leaders that he doesn't see eye to eye with, wants you to believe that he is up for that job, despite the fact that he cannot convince a majority of the American people that he is the right person for the job with the right ideology, despite the fact that he hasn't won in the courtroom in God knows how long. Eileen Cannon doesn't really count, does she? Because he appointed her. Meanwhile, back over at CNN, Abby Phillips has Donald Trump's niece, Mary Trump, on.
Quickly, before you go, do you think he should go to jail?
I absolutely think he should go to jail. And that's not just based on the findings here of being guilty, but because of his egregious behavior during the course of this trial.
All right, Mary Trump, thank you very much.
Mary, listen, she can be as personal as she wants to be about this and has every reason to be, but she kind of makes a point. And I'm in the Isaac Bailey camp too. I don't think you throw people in jail necessarily for nonviolent crimes. Donald Trump is just a different animal. He has existed in a bubble where he's never faced repercussions before that anyone can point to, really. His business failings, he never felt the impact of. Now, I spoke of Senator Tim Scott earlier. And by the way, polling seems to indicate, is it polling? Yeah, I guess there's Vegas odds have Tim Scott as being Donald Trump's vice presidential appointee. Like he wants to run with Tim Scott as vice president. Anyway, Abby Phillips, did I say Ashley? I said Ashley. Abby Phillips from CNN had Tim Scott on, and those two were cantankerous. Tim Scott just refusing to answer questions, and Abby asking a rightful question. There seems to be a strain of revenge and vengeance in Donald Trump's 2024 campaign, Project 2025, we all know about, that there seems to be a missive now to get into office and seek revenge. That's going to be priority number one on day one and for longer than day one. And it's a valid question to ask someone who is potentially going to be Donald Trump's vice presidential pick.
That's the goal.
So when President Trump, when former President Trump says that if he is elected president, he would appoint a special prosecutor to, quote, go after the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America, Joe Biden, and the entire Biden crime family. Are you saying that that is not something that you would support?
I'm simply saying that President Trump has said it himself.
Can't say it.
The best revenge is success.
Actually, Senator, I have to correct you on that because he's explicitly said.
I was in the room. No, you can't correct me.
I'm looking at the notes right here. He has explicitly said that they did it. He said, okay, when he said it Senator, himself. He said it publicly. They did it to me, so we have to do it to them.
I'm happy to debate it.
He said they did it to me, so they have to do it to them. Do you support that?
Abby, I know you are. This is why the ratings on CNN are so low. The bottom line is simply this. Without question, President Trump has looked me in my eyes in a room full of other folks and said, you know what? The best revenge is success. Let's not make this about just Donald Trump.
He may have said that to you in a private room, but he has said it to thousands of his supporters that he plans to go after his political enemies. I don't understand how you can deny that he has said that publicly. It's in the public record.
I don't know how you will not take my own word for what I heard with my own ears.
Only because he said the exact opposite.
I hear you.
He said the exact opposite publicly for millions of people to see on television. He has tweeted it. He said it on the radio. He has said, they've got after me, so I'm going to go after them. You can just answer the question. If he said that, would you support that?
I have answered the question. You don't like my answer, but I've already answered the question. But here's the bottom line is this. I'm not sitting here to debate you about what you heard Donald Trump say versus what I heard Donald Trump say. Here's what I can tell you. What's not debatable is the fact that African-American unemployment hit the lowest level in the history of the country under Donald Trump.
It actually got lower under President Joe Biden. And that's not debatable either, Senator. I mean, listen, when you have politicians who spread disinformation like that, is it any surprise when we get stories from The Guardian that tell us that OpenAI has determined that disinformation is spreading from Russia and Israeli, using tools to spread disinformation, not just to the United States, but throughout the rest of the world. And you've got a political party in this country that relies on it, that needs it, that feeds off of it, thrives through it, honestly. So dive into that story when the Ron Show returns on a quick break here on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, wherever you podcast. So I'll have this article in today's show notes at RonShowATL.com. Story out of The Guardian. OpenAI released its first ever report on how its artificial intelligence tools are being used for covert influence operations, revealing that the company had disrupted disinformation campaigns originating from Russia, China, Israel, and Iran. Hold up. Russia, China, Iran. Okay, no surprise there. Israel? Malicious actors used the company's generative AI models to create and post propaganda content across social media platforms and to translate their content into different languages. None of the campaigns gained traction or reached large audiences, according to the report, or at least not through OpenAI. As generative AI has become a booming industry, there has been widespread concern among researchers and lawmakers over its potential for increasing the quantity and quality of online disinformation. And understand that before the quality of OpenAI, the disinformation was already doing its dirty work here in the United States. Donald Trump would not have been elected president without disinformation. It's not hard to say that. Back to the article. Artificial intelligence companies such as OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, have tried with mixed results to assuage these concerns and place guardrails on their technology. OpenAI's 39-page report is one of the most detailed accounts from an artificial intelligence company on the use of its software for propaganda. OpenAI claimed its researchers found and banned accounts associated with 5 covert influence operations over the past 3 months, which were from a mix of state and private sectors. In Russia, 2 operations created and spread content criticizing the U.S., Ukraine, and several Baltic nations. One of the operations used an OpenAI model to debug code and create a bot that posted on Telegram. China's influence operation generated text in English, Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, which operatives then posted on Twitter and Medium. Iranian actors generated full articles that attacked the U.S. and Israel, which they translated into English and French. An Israeli political firm called Stoic. Are you listening to this? An Israeli political firm called Stoic ran a network of fake social media accounts, which created a range of content, including posts accusing U.S. student protests against Israel's war in Gaza of being anti-Semitic. I'm going to go back and read that to you again. An Israeli political firm called Stoic ran a network of fake social media accounts which created a range of content, including posts accusing U.S. student protests against Israel's war in Gaza of being anti-Semitic. Who's been saying that for a while? I'd raise my right hand, but my shoulder's been bothering me, so it's up askew. More from The Guardian. And by the way, this will, again, be in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. Several of the disinformation spreaders that OpenAI banned from its platform were already known to researchers and authorities. The U.S. Treasury sanctioned 2 Russian men in March who were allegedly behind one of the campaigns that OpenAI detected, while Meta has also banned Stoic, that's the Israeli political firm, from its platform this year, for violating its policies. The report also highlights how generative AI is being incorporated into disinformation campaigns as a means of improving certain aspects of content generation, such as making more convincing foreign language posts, but that it is not the sole tool for propaganda. All of these operations used AI to some degree, but none used it exclusively, according to the report. Instead, AI-generated material was just one of many types of content they posted, alongside more traditional formats, such as manually written texts or memes copied from across the internet. While none of the campaigns resulted in any notable impact, their use of the technology shows how malicious actors are finding that generative AI allows them to scale up production of propaganda. I don't know. I feel like that's like a warning shot, a canary in the coal mine, if you will. I also want to pivot to this story in the New York Times. It's talking about like an alarming number of House members just leaving Congress. They're just done with it. The ineffectiveness is just kind of wearing on them. And apparently Marjorie Taylor Greene has something to do with this. Let me read a bit from the New York Times piece that, again, I'll share in the show notes. It's got a paywall. I'm just letting you know. One of the earliest members of the Freedom Caucus, Representative Jeff Duncan of South Carolina, was nicknamed Hardhead by John Boehner, House Speaker John Boehner, for his unbudging fiscal conservatism. But Republican leaders still saw promise in Mr. Duncan, who was later awarded a subcommittee chairmanship on the Energy and Commerce Committee. By 2021, under a program introduced during Mr. Boehner's speakership, Mr. Duncan became the designated mentor of a Georgia freshman congressperson, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. But Ms. Greene met with him only once. Mr. Duncan said in an interview and seemed less interested in learning the ins and outs of Congress than in developing a social media following about which he knew little. In any case, he said he had grown weary of the prideful intransigence exhibited by his comrades on the right. I've told my colleagues in the Freedom Caucus many times, you need to learn how to take a win. That's Jeff Duncan. He's decided that this year will be his last in Congress. Another Freedom Caucus member to toss in the towel, Representative Ken Buck of Colorado, packed up and left Capitol Hill for good in late March. In an interview in his House office cluttered with moving boxes, Mr. Buck spoke wistfully of how an institution he revered had been taken over by, quote, social media stars who are not well equipped to handle the rigors of Congress. You could send them to school for 10 years, and they still wouldn't be good at this job. All they know is how to use social media to burn the place down. Buck, Duncan, Representative Weinstrup each insisted that the Democrats had their share of extremist show ponies as well. In reply, several Democrats maintained that even if this were so, their leftist colleagues were not hell-bent on chaos like their far-right counterparts. Marjorie Taylor Greene, from Georgia, 14th Congressional District, a shoo-in for re-election in that gerrymandered district, of course. Once again, making Georgians proud. Let me read another passage from this article, by the way. One of the departing Democratic members, Representative John Sarbanes of Maryland, recalled an incident in 2019 when several House Republicans, led by Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida and the Majority Leader, Representative Steve Scalise of Louisiana, barged into a classified facility where the House Committee on Intelligence was conducting an impeachment inquiry of President Donald Trump. You realize at that moment how much an institution's ability to function depends on members treating that institution with respect, Sarbanes said. And when you have these rabble-rousers coming in who are declaring that government serves no good purpose and they want to tear it to the ground, that's a cancer inside the place. Sarbanes went on to describe how, in his view, the rabble-rousers have all but incapacitated Congress. You show up on a Monday and are told you'll be voting on 4 or 5 bills that week. Then by Wednesday, you're hearing that a tiny group of legislators have held the place hostage. Those bills didn't make it out of the Rules Committee and are off the calendar, and you're told to go home. To date, the 118th Congress, that began its work on January 3rd, 2023, has enacted a total of 64 bills, less than 1/5 of the legislation that was passed by any of the previous 4 Congresses. Even that sluggish pace constituted a grind. Members described once routine House matters that are now fraught with melodrama, from passing bipartisan appropriations bills to electing a House Speaker. We've seen that play out. These things that I'm most proud of, that were the hardest to do, were negotiating the debt ceiling, passing the National Defense Authorization Act, and reauthorizing and reforming FISA, according to Representative Letourneau, referring to the Foreign Intelligence Service Surveillance Act. With an arid chuckle, he added, those things would have been just normal business in the past. Many of the 2024 retirees, according to the Times article, echoed Mr. Letourneau's sentiments. Few of them came to Washington expecting that performing the rote tasks like keeping the government operating and maintaining America's credit rating would amount to career highlights. Referring to this year's bipartisan Senate immigration bill, which Speaker Mike Johnson has avoided bringing to the House floor for fear of angering the far right, Mr. Buck lamented, we won't deal with the tough issues. The border is a tough issue. The Senate passed a great starting point, and we just walked away. In addition to the increasingly joyless slog of governance, the job has become less rewarding in other ways. Since 2009, the salaries of both House and Senate members have been frozen at $174,000. These poor people, bless them. High pay for the average American, but challenging for members maintaining residences in both Washington and their home districts. Aware of the low estimation in which the public holds Congress, they have repeatedly voted to deny themselves cost of living increases. Sometimes you wonder if members should just wear sackcloth, Sarbanes said. Though none of the 20 people interviewed for this article would acknowledge that financial considerations played into their decisions to retire, one of them, Representative Larry Buxton, a 7-term Indiana Republican, said, I think recruiting qualified people is getting more difficult, and I do think you're seeing some people leaving because of the pay situation. Another exiting member, Representative Tony Cardenas, a California Democrat, admitted, it weighs on us. It does. And Congress shouldn't be a place where only the wealthy can serve. I say that all the time when we talk about legislative pay here in the state of Georgia. To be in the House or the Senate, it doesn't pay you a whole lot, which means you've got to either be already independently wealthy so you don't have to worry about it, or have a job that pays you ridiculously well and also gives you the freedom to take wide swaths of time off because the House or the General Assembly is only in session for so long, right? That it's okay. The average person, the average Joe, can't serve in the state legislature unless they have, like a rideshare gig job and also already live in and around Metro Atlanta so that they can set their own hours to make their own pay and also not have to pay extra to stay in Atlanta during a General Assembly term because it's where they already live. All right, I'm going to post that article and all of today's show notes. You'll get them at ronshowatl.com. What a week. What a week. And just think, we still have like 5.5 months before we decide who's going to be president of the United States. And one of our options has now been found guilty of 34 charges. Back Monday, 9 to 10 a.m. on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or, of course, wherever you podcast. Show notes at RonShowATL.com. Have a great weekend. We will see you Monday.